Hey everyone, so you want to get into VFX production management, huh? Let's talk about it. Please take a moment to subscribe, and if you like one of my videos, maybe click like and share it on social media. So getting an entry-level job in the production department at a visual effects or an animation studio is the best place to learn about the entire VFX and animation process and how these movies are produced. You're going to learn how to manage a show. You're going to learn how to manage a client. You're going to learn how to manage artists. And you're going to absorb an enormous amount of visual effects information and computer graphics information as you build through your first few stages of this career. Now, like render wranglers, the production assistants and production coordinators really help build the stage on which visual effects artists can stand on and perform and do their work. So they're really important integral roles, and those folks doing the production gigs have to be at the top of their game. So let's talk about the production department hierarchy. I'm going to go through each of the roles, and then I'll describe in a moment how these roles get apportioned to different tasks. So at the top is the executive producer. Right below them is the producer. Now, there'll be sometimes an associate producer or a digital producer, and those will be subservient or under the producer. Go one level down and you'll have the production manager and supervisor. Again, sometimes there'll be an associate production manager, and again, that person will be subordinate or below the production manager. Further down, you've got the production coordinator, and this is where the roles change a little bit into junior and senior. So a lot of studios will have junior coordinators, and senior coordinators. It depends on each studio. Further down, you've got the production assistants. Now there, again, you've got junior production assistants sometimes, or production assistants and senior production assistants. And some studios will use the term a runner or production runner. I don't really know how much that gets divided up between junior and senior. A runner is sort of just a runner. Now let's look at the duties of production management, all the way from executive producer all the way down to the runner. First, you've got agreeing on deliverables, contract obligations, payment schedule, milestones. This is normally handled at the top by the executive producer and producer. They're going to manage the client. They're going to even come up with what the final bid price is, and they're the ones who are going to say, hey, it's time to send us the next check. So they have a very important role in this. As you roll down, you've got managing expectations and managing the satisfaction of the client studio, making sure that they get regular updates and that you're coordinating with them. That will often, happen at the executive producer or producer level. As we go further down, as we start getting into what some of the production manager will do, and that is identifying and hiring a full VFX crew. Sometimes it's internal hires that you're arranging to bring onto your crew. Sometimes you're bringing in folks externally. It's usually a mix of both. Furthermore, you've got the scheduling of the shots, human resources, and the digital resources needed. So that means that you got to start figuring out how you're going to be doing these shots over a time period, and then that's going to affect your hiring and how much render or disk space you're going to need. Project management and project coordination as needed. I simply put it in there because there's a million things that pop up, and the more organized and managed the process can be by the production department, the better the outcome. So now we're going to get into the production coordinator sort of strata, upper levels, and that's where they're going to be making meetings. They're going to be making more meetings, and they're going to need to manage these meetings effectively. Meetings are expensive. Something I really want to point out there is when you get 10 or 12 highly paid individuals into a room for an hour, well, that's starting to get up into the thousands of dollars per hour that you're putting into this room. So you better manage that time effectively and let those folks get back to their job when the meeting is over. You're going to need to work with the render wranglers and similar on priorities for the farm and disk. You need to figure out which render jobs are going to be going first and last. If there's disk cleanup needs to happen, which artists need to participate, which shots can go offline. This is a very detail-oriented part of the role. You've got to liaise with studio support, facilities, IT, office management, with sometimes HR issues, meaning are two folks not getting along together if they sit near each other? Or is there an air vent that's blowing onto one of the artists and making them cold and wanting to go home early? You need to assure that the teams have what they need. Data entry is a big part of the operation. Whether you're entering data in a shotgun or it's competitor F-track, or whether you're entering things into Excel, whether or not you're going into digital asset management systems and updating assets and monitoring which assets are done and whether or not they're done in time, whether or not you're entering data and approving time cards, whether or not you're tracking physical props and assets that the client gives you. There's a whole lot of detail-oriented, tedious part of this job that has to be dotted I's and crossed T's where there can't be any mistakes. Now you've got office support, phones, faxes, schedule boards. Believe it or not, a lot of studios still like to use big magnetic boards, and all the shots will go up on the board so they can move them around. It's a very tactile way to schedule, and it's still very common out there. You have to maintain all those boards. Someone has to cut up all the little magnets and put all the little shot names on them. That's going to happen by the production assistant or the production coordinator or maybe even the runner. Now you're getting down into party planning. Believe it or not, there's a lot of party planning and Friday events and beer events and morale boosting events and milestone celebrations. So you need to plan for those parties. You need to bring in all the stuff. You need to bring in the food if you need to. You need to bring in craft service. That's basically food. It's the name for food in the film industry. You need to run errands at times. So if you have a vehicle or not, you may be running and picking up things and bringing them back to the studio. There's also cleaning up after meals and events. This is you get towards the bottom, but somebody's got to do it. It's usually the PA or the runner, and they're having to get out there and deal with cleaning up after every event so that the studio is not unhappy with this production's mess. If there's a one-person production crew where it's the producer and it's a really small shop or a really small show, they're going to do everything on this list. They're going to have to deal with, craft service, and they're going to have to deal with talking to the client, and they're going to have to deal with managing tiffs between the artists. Everything involved on this list will have to happen by that one person. So maybe there's now a producer and a coordinator. Well, they're pretty much going to divide up these tasks around the middle, right? The producer is going to handle the top half of these tasks. The coordinator is going to handle the bottom half of these tasks. And there's going to be some overlap on some days. You'd be surprised how many times I've seen a producer out there handing out food. So maybe you've got 3 folks now in the production crew, or you have 5 or 6 people on the production crew. Well, now you're going to have executive producers, coordinators, you're going to have assistants, maybe a runner. They're going to spread all of those duties across themselves. And the executive producers will be taking care of those top duties, and the PA and runner will be handling the ones on the bottom. But the handoffs might be very gray area between them, and they each might be handling many of the same duties across the strata. It really comes down to, in production, you do whatever you have to do to make sure the things happen. So sometimes producers will be doing very, very low-level tasks. Sometimes production coordinators and PAs all of a sudden get into a call with the client, and boy, they better answer the question right. The pressure's on. So I'd like to go through some of the aspects of this role that we really need to focus on if you want to succeed in this type of job. And that's generally coming in as a production coordinator or production assistant or a runner, or sometimes even the receptionist of a studio. Whatever it takes to get in, these are the types of aspects to your role you're going to need to excel at to move up through the ranks. First, you're going to need to constantly prove yourself. You're going to need to show everyone that you've got what it takes, that you've got the right attitude. The good thing is most studios are meritocracies, but the reality is you have to know people. It's not just about doing the job well, but it's also about making the right connections. So you have to be liked. If you're someone who doesn't get along with people, if you're someone who's sort of a little rough or a little mean or a little gruff, well, it's probably going to hurt you when it comes to moving up through the ranks. You have to be liked. You also have to be tough and you have to be resolute, but you have to be liked. And that's a real important part of this job. Another part of this is there's a lot of gray area. So you might get conflicting directives sometimes. An example is you might report daily to a producer, but it's the supervisors who often rule the roost and really run the show. So the producer may tell you one thing, and then the supervisor in a session might say the opposite, and you're going to have to manage this. It's not really a black and white issue where either it's what the producer says or what the supervisor says. You now need to manage this conflict and figure out what best compromise or what direction you need to go in. That's not always so easy. What makes it even a little more complicated is, although you have these supervisors and producers, you're actually managed long-term by a different manager. Sometimes it's like a studio artist or production manager that just handles managing all the production teams in their reviews and promotions and such. So that's also your boss. And the reality is you're subservient to every role above you. If you're a PA, you need to do whatever the production coordinator says, whatever the manager says, whatever the production or producer says. If there's any leads or supervisors on the show, you're probably gonna have to do what they say, or at least double check with the show, but you're likely going to be doing what a lot of people tell you to do. And that can be a little bit of a challenge. There's this whole idea of the hours can be rough. Yeah, everyone says that, but I mean, the hours can be really, really rough. When you get towards the end of a show, it's not unreasonable and unlikely to see 50, 60 plus hour weeks for weeks at a time, where you're simply deciding whether or not you're going to be working Saturday and Sunday or just Saturday for many, many weeks, sometimes months at a time. It depends on a lot of factors, but more likely than not, you will be working long hours for months or weeks at a time, and it's really going to push you to the edge. Another thing to think about this is a pyramid of staffing with a few producers at the top and a lot of PAs and coordinators at the bottom. It's a zero-sum game, and it's competitive. Not everyone's going to be a producer who's a PA or a coordinator. The reality is that some of those folks are going to find that they either can't cut it, or that they really don't like this, or there's some other part of the studio that they take a liking to and they break off. So as you move up the chain, there's going to be less of those roles. That makes it much more competitive. So it's much easier to get promoted from a PA to a coordinator than from a coordinator to a production manager. There's also some other interesting dynamics. For instance, sometimes coordinators who are usually getting paid an hourly wage, they don't necessarily want to move up to a production manager role because they have to switch to a salary. Now, even though on a 40-hour-a-week basis, the salary is way better pay than the coordinator, because there's so much overtime involved, which can be time and a half in most countries, in most states, most provinces, then that means that the production coordinator is taking a pay cut to become a production manager in a lot of cases. It's a bad dynamic, but it's just the reality of switching from an hourly job with much, much overtime to a salary job. So if you are making that switch, you'll need to take that into consideration as you ask for salary and negotiate your salary. It's a tough spot, and I know multiple coordinators who are still coordinators simply because they didn't want to take that leap from getting paid by the hour to a salary position where they would basically get less money for the first couple of years of that new role. Something to consider. It can be hard to move laterally from one shop to another. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're working at a visual effects studio or an animation studio, and you finally got promoted from a PA to a coordinator, and you've been a coordinator for 6 months. Well, when you apply to other studios, they may want you to start as a PA, even though you've been a production coordinator. A lot of studios, unless you have a real proven track record with multiple years of success and good references in that role, they're likely going to want you to start you at a slightly lower role. Or maybe instead of a coordinator, they start you as a junior coordinator. And then after a certain amount of months, you prove yourself and they'll move you up the chain. If you are successful and you are a go-getter and you are top of your game, it's not a big deal. You will move up the chain. I've seen multiple production people move up through 2 roles within a year just because the need was there and they showed that they had the skills. But like I said, it can be relentless. It can be very tiring. There's one thing I like to point out, and that is if you have any health issues or sort of challenges in your life, this job is going to bring them out. So if you have stomach issues, your stomach is going to be in knots through this job. If you have back issues, then you're probably going to have a sore back through this production assistant, production coordinator kind of role. You're going to be on your feet all day long. So if you have knee or leg problems or walking problems, it's going to be a challenge. It's not to say it's not a challenge you can't overcome. I know many folks with all sorts of maladies that are really successful producers that just figured out how to make it work for themselves, but it's something that you want to account for in advance, and it's why you want to try to stay as healthy as you can, especially during the slower part of a show, because when that show ramps up, you're going to be working many hours with low sleep and not necessarily eating the greatest food all the time. So again, this job is relentless, and you really have to want it. So I decided to ask a few executive producers, and production managers that I know to maybe give me a little bit of feedback on 3 basic questions. And I asked these folks, what's the advantage of getting your start as a junior production person getting into a studio? Secondly, I asked them, what are the qualities that you're looking for when you're sourcing or promoting junior production talent up through the ranks? And third, what advice do you have for folks who are looking to get into the industry, and would you advise against it for any reason? Let's hear what they have to say.
My name is Camille Guyer, and my job title is executive producer at VFX. First of all, I wouldn't never say to somebody, go get a receptionist job or a PA job if you don't want to be in this business, because they're the hardest jobs, in visual effects. And it's the most low paying. So why would you go for a low paying job unless you have a track of that you want to become a producer?
My name is Carl Walters, and I am an executive producer at Industrial Light and Magic, and am based out of the Greater London area. Yeah, I think the advantages of entering or embarking on a production career via the studio would have to be the culture and community that a studio provides, as opposed to other ways to get into the industry. There's a sort of established ecological system that you get with any studio. And I think that is advantageous to someone who is starting, because there's a lot of support in that role.
My name is Hanna Damato, and I'm a production manager at an animation studio. Well, I speak from experience when it comes to this. I started in the industry as an intern, and then after I graduated college, I came back and started in as a receptionist. So after I did my year in reception, I moved on to being a PA, and then ultimately progressed in the industry.
I think that it's get in the door. If you go to a small studio, you'll be able to really roll up your sleeves and really learn and do hands-on work probably quicker than you would in a bigger studio. The bigger studio advantage is that you get to see real workings of the machine. But it might take you a little longer to get to the next level because there's more competition.
If you run into any sort of challenges, which we all have done at one point or another in our lives, there are lots of opportunities to sort of seek advice from others and to observe the way other people solve problems. It's a very educational atmosphere, and I think that that is really helpful, especially for someone who's starting out in their career.
Well, the great thing about being a junior is you're not expected to know a lot. So that's a great reason for someone who isn't very experienced to get their foot in the door. So having that junior type of role gives you exposure to how the industry works. I was lucky enough that the people I worked with were great mentors. Once you get that foot in the door, you can't just sit there and not do much. You need to find a mentor. You need to start performing beyond the capacity of what you were hired for.
Normally, when I was in a position of hiring a lot of people, no matter what position it was, I'd look at that person as, could this person first of all, want to be a production manager or a producer? And do they have the basic skills, people skills, communication skills to be able to move up? And so a lot of people hire entry-level people sort of looking in the future, because it's an investment, because those entry-level positions always, in an ideal world, successfully will then turn into a promotion. Like the basics, like coming in on time, if there's a problem, asking questions, not being too shy to just tell us like what's happening, or if I'd rather somebody take a step back and say, I don't understand this, I need some more clarification, than someone runs with something for 3 or 4 days and then it's wrong. I don't expect people to know everything. Everybody has their own system. Everybody has their own models. Every producer works differently, even in the same organization. And so that is really important that you speak up and that you communicate effectively, that you, know the basics of a good work ethic. If you don't speak up with your own team, how can we expect you to be able to put you in front of a client later on in life, right? So the practice is practice with us, because we're a friendly bunch, and then you can move on with clients. If you tiptoe around a subject and the client doesn't understand what you're talking about, or you're writing emails that are not clear, there's only trouble down the road. And so it's good to get in front of things, to flag things, and that's for the producer level and production manager level. But in the entry level position, it's the same thing that goes on with the team above you, your coordinators, your production managers, is that You can communicate what's happening, whatever, with your staff, with the artists, so that that's the practice that you get to then be able to do it in front of a client.
Well, I'll say the thing that I typically tell everyone in an interview setting is that for an entry-level position, I'm looking first and foremost for attitude and aptitude. I think that is the most important quality of any applicant, because this is a very diverse industry. It's a very challenging industry, and it's a very unpredictable industry. And so having someone who has, let's say, a resilient spirit, I think is really the most important quality, you know, especially for people who are coming in at entry-level positions. And then I don't think anyone who is hiring at that level is looking or cares about experience. They're looking for someone who has sort of an optimistic and resilient spirit, and someone who you can see, even though they don't know what's ahead of them, that they're going to be able to overcome those challenges. And, you know, having someone who can, you know, is resourceful and can sort of find out the solution on their own, even when it's in a very gray atmosphere, I think is a good quality. So that's what I tend to look for.
You are most qualified when you are actually doing the job before you get promoted. I was actually coordinating as a PA before I got the promotion to the actual role. And that demonstrated to them that I was absolutely capable of that. And it drives me to help my team to get to that finish line and take away any blockers that I can. Because as a production person, it's not just spreadsheets. It's you're working with your teams, and you're working on morale, and you are the interpersonal communications between the departments. And the more you can do to make people feel like they're being heard and take away those blockers and have their day be as smooth as possible, that's a big part of being a production person, is helping your team take away any issues they might have.
If you can get any job at any studio with no experience coming out of school, then you've hit the lotto. I mean, that's very difficult to do. I think that it's really, really important to do as many internships as possible, because people want to see life experience and work-related experience beyond schooling, and so that it's really important to get as many internships. I'm really a big advocate for internships. I'll just put it right out there.
This is an industry centered around who you know. So it's very important to follow leads. And what I mean by that is, if you know someone works at a company that you want to work for, get them to put in a good word for you. Or better yet, get them to make an introduction to the hiring manager. If you know someone who works in the industry and isn't part of the company you want to work for, get them to write you a recommendation for that company that you want to work for. It really is an industry where it's who you know, and it's an industry that provides opportunities based on following leads. So what you need to do is establish that momentum, and it's really difficult to do that initially. It gets easier over time when you grow your network, and you can sort of move from one established relationship to the next, and you have all kinds of people who can speak, you know, highly of you on your behalf. And similarly, I would say, if you get to the end of that and you find a position that is accessible to you, and you find a hiring manager who wants to hire you, and it isn't exactly the role that you had in mind, take the role. Because for the reasons that I just said, the hardest thing is to establish momentum. So if you are in an atmosphere where you've had that established for you, even if it isn't exactly what you want to do, you already in that circumstance have a leg up on other people who aren't in the industry. So that would be my advice. Just get in wherever the open position is, get momentum, do your job well, get people to say, who's that guy over there, gal over there doing a really good job, and then follow leads.
Maybe you worked in, you know, a store or any kind of customer service role. One thing that Joe and I often talk about is that if you are in a junior role at a company, if you have experienced some sort of customer service role, that helps you be more prepared for a role in this industry, because everyone you encounter all day, those are your customers. Whether your customers are your other production people or the artists on your show, you have to make people happy that you work with. And how best to do that but to understand their wants and needs, and understand the process. And one piece of advice I got from a producer that was extremely valuable, yet at the time I was so inexperienced I didn't know what to do with it, was the best production people are the ones that can prepare for what they don't know is going to happen next. And as a PA, I was like, well, how am I supposed to know? And she said, well, that's the thing, is with experience, you begin to understand what is going to happen next. And you understand that, okay, when we get to this point in animation, that's when they're going to expect to get a delivery, or we're going to have to send this many passes of animation, because I understand from this other show I was on that I have to show spline before I show polish and things like that. So it's, if you can't get a job in visual effects, try animation. If you can't get a job in, and vice versa. They're very interchangeable industries, despite not always, not maybe seeming so from the outside. There's really, they're so similar, yet it's just sometimes the terminology that's different. So I would say you have to really want it. That's the first thing. So if you don't really want it, think about it first before you jump in. If you want it, go for it. Just know it's going to be hard sometimes. You're not going to enjoy it sometimes. You gotta look at the big picture and think about, what are we doing, and how many good days versus bad days do you have? And is it really worth the verbal abuse I'm going through? It's not always that bad, but from someone who's been on some shows that are really infamous for the way they treated their employees, it can be extremely challenging. And I absolutely love it. I loved it from a very young age and wanted to spend my life doing it. And the fact that I got to be a part of visual effects films I love that I can say that. But some of those films were extremely challenging to work on and weren't extremely rewarding. So, how do you balance all of that? You have to want it. There has to be passion there.
Wow. Okay. Advise against it. Let's start there.
Would I advise people against working in this industry? I've thought a lot about that.
Well, of course I advise against it. As somebody who's my initial thought is I'm going to tell you all the things that aren't great about this, because you have to really want it to survive. And that's one of the great / awful things about this industry, is it is so rewarding in a lot of ways, but it is also soul crushing in a lot of ways. And it's really difficult at times to put your heart and soul into a project and not be respected for how much effort you put in. And production, we are often, not really recognized as being essential to the team the way that the artists are. And as a production person, of course, I totally disagree with that. And you'll find certain artists that agree that production people and experienced production people are very valuable. But it can be a really tough industry.
There are long hours involved in this business, and there's a lot of stress. And so I think that it's really important that people figure out a way to balance their life, be able to say what they can and can't do for themselves, take time. I think it's really important to not work 6-7 days a week, as a routine, to not work till 10 or 11 o'clock every night. I've seen coordinators and production managers do that when we were slow. And I would say to them, why are you here until 9 or 10 o'clock at night? There's not much going on. And there's going to become a time pretty soon where we're going to be all working that time. And this is the time to sort of take care of yourself. And so I would say just pace yourself, and because there'll come a time where you're going to put in the long hours. And so when things are in the middle of a show or in the beginning of a show, use that time, that analogy of, just pace yourself. And it's not for everybody. I mean, I think after about a year or two, people know if this is not the industry for them. I think it's hard for me to answer that, because I don't know what other people's, what they have going on in their life physically or emotionally, or, with other commitments in their life. So it's hard for me to answer. But for me, I found a way to make it work.
I don't think that there's a right or wrong. I think that this industry is right for some people, it's wrong for other people. I think that a lot of it has to do with knowing yourself. A lot of people get intrigued by the sort of bright lights of the film industry, and then they just have this hard, cold reality hit them when it's 16-hour days and a lot of client stress and a lot of demands on their time. But I think the most important thing is to be authentic with interest in the industry and doing whatever you're pursuing as a role within the industry. If you are genuinely interested in it, you will find a way to enjoy it. And it's sort of, like very cliche expressions come to mind, but it really is one of those things where if you're doing what you love doing, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think that that's true for the film industry. If you are working on a particular project, you're working with a group of people that you really enjoy working with. You're working for a client or for an established creative talent who's really inspiring. That will be its own reward. If you like helping others, if you like being a part of that process and playing the role of guiding and communicating and getting, and keeping people on track and helping people achieve their vision, then it's a great, it's a really great career. If what I said seems challenging or frustrating, and you're like, well, can I do this, that, and the other thing? Then don't do it, because you're gonna then experience the role of a production entity as a chore, and nobody likes doing chores. And so it'll exhaust you quickly, it'll exhaust you relentlessly, and you will not be good at that job.
I've been in the industry on and off for 25 years now, and about 12 years solid in all of that of working in the industry. And there's no way I could stop. I love it too much. I think it's so much fun. I think it's difficult at times. It's very stressful at times, but the fun aspect and the people you get to work with are worth it. You get to work with amazing people in this industry, and so many smart, intelligent, wonderful people. And that's really cool. You start almost every project. How are we going to do this? We don't know how. The studio hasn't done it this way. We've never done it this way. We have to build a new pipeline. We have to build new things, and nobody knows how we're going to do it. And somehow it ends up happening. Sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time it does. And it just is a mind-blowing thing when you are in the part of a process, when you're on a show or a commercial or a game, and you've seen it from the storyboard to the final comp. And that process is what drives me, and it drives me to help my team to get to that finish line.
I want to thank everyone for their feedback. That was some great commentary, and I hope some of that was helpful. And I want to end with just a little bit of advice that I might have, having worked with production and with a lot of production folks over the years. Here's a few tips that I think really might help you be a successful production management person. When you get in, think about these tips. Number one, bear in mind, you're not going to get promoted until you're doing the work already. You might have heard Johanna already say that once, and that's the truth. Until you're doing coordinator tasks, you're not going to be a coordinator. Until you're doing production management tasks, you're not going to be a production manager. That's just the way the game is played. So you're going to need to show initiative. You're going to need to take on new work, and you need to pace yourself. So you can't take on so much work that you're now going to crash and burn. So take on each new task, digest it, work it into your workflow, then take on the next task. Constantly challenge yourself so that you're pushing yourself right up to your limits and pulling back just a few clicks. When you first get hired to a studio, it's really important that you focus on the formal, the informal, and the structural roles that are within an organization. And this is what I mean by that. There's a very formal reporting structure that you'll be assigned to. You'll have a boss, maybe a producer. It'll be very clear who it is you report to, who you go ask questions from, who you tell that you need a day off or you have a doctor's appointment. That's pretty black and white. But then you're going to have to deal with this informal structure. Like I mentioned earlier, you might have a key supervisor on the show that's really insistent that something happens a certain way. And they're not your boss, but you're probably going to do it their way because you want to keep them happy and they're the supervisor on your show. So you need to figure out where these informal management networks are. It's not always so black and white, but you'll have to feel them out. And finally, there's actual structural factors to keep in mind within a studio. And here's some examples. You might have a studio with an executive producer and a couple of producers, and one of those producers and the executive producer maybe have been to 3 different studios together over the last 10 years. And that other producer, maybe this is their first show or second show, and they just got hired to the studio. The dynamic between the producer and the executive producer have worked together for years, and the producer that maybe you're working for, this new producer, are going to be very, very different. And if the producer who's been working with the executive producer wants to be a little insistent or stubborn about something, they're likely going to get a lot more leeway than perhaps the new producer who just came in and hasn't really proven themselves or finished out a show yet. So understanding where those structural roles are, who's friends with who, who's worked with who, look back on LinkedIn and realize, oh, these folks have worked together for 15 years across 5 different studios. It doesn't really matter what you think if these 2 people are insistent that something's going to happen a certain way, right? So you need to kind of focus on where these structural relationships are and these informal relationships are. And the more you can focus on those and then stay above them and try to stay out of them and try to stay clear of the politics, this will really help you succeed, because studios, again, are not black and white, and the relationships between individuals are really important to key in on. So really, if you want to get into production and you want to be a producer, then by all means, jump in, get yourself an internship, get yourself a reception job at a studio, do whatever it takes to get in the door, show that you're a go-getter, and you will move up into production. Just make sure everybody knows that you want it, ask questions, learn, absorb, and you'll love it. But know what you're getting into. It is one of the hardest jobs in the studio. So this job will definitely burn you out, and you have to be really careful to manage your health, to manage your mental health, and to manage your whole balance of life very carefully to make sure that you can pull off this job and still maintain a livelihood outside of work. As you move up in your career into producer and executive producer, the stress doesn't go away, but since you have the control, the reward is way more intense. And when you can control a whole show and it goes through with success and it finally shows up on the screen and you see the rewards of all that labor and that love that you put into it, well, that's where producers really, really get the payoff and really enjoy their job. So go for it. That's it. Hope this was helpful. Thanks, everyone.
And don't forget to like and subscribe. Cup of Joe, VFX and Animation.